Good morning. Welcome to GamEd Grampians. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. My name is David Park and I'm the founder of Ligara. Ligara means play, fun and language. In language, play, fun and diversion in language. And thank you, as I said, thank you very much for joining us today. First and foremost, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to the country or any of the countries that you're currently located on. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners and also past, present and emerging elders that may be out there and may be joining us today. And I'm hoping today you do take something away from it. We have some very interesting guest speakers with us, presenting both live and also showing pre-recorded presentations, but also having the availability to answer any questions you have through our live chat and also our live function at the end of the presentations or at times even during their presentation. So what I'd like to do first is I'd just like to play a video around what jobs of the future may look like and just for you to consider where your future may be going for students, but also for teachers and others who are joining us. Some of the other things they could be doing to encourage the generation or this generation going forward. So bear with me a moment. We'll just play the video. There is a slight delay in the video happening, so we'll get that started now.
GamEd started, I suppose, in the beginning as an event for young children or senior secondary school children to be linked with industry. You don't need to be in the capital city to work with other people in that industry. Nationally, internationally, can all be done from your lounge room. We've had one guest speaker today who lives in country Victoria and he works for a studio in Melbourne. And he does it, in a country or a rural setting. Last week we had a person who 15 years worth of visual effects experience, and he said that he worked on Pacific Rim or Prometheus in his kitchen. So that was quite inspiring to listen to that, and that's what the kids took away, that they don't need to be relocating. They can actually do that within an environment that they're actually comfortable with.
I've always loved games as a kid, but it was never really something that I ever thought about doing until I was looking at uni courses. I knew I wanted to do art, I loved art, and I saw it on the list of courses at RMIT and I was like, I like games, that's kind of cool. So that's what started my journey basically. Definitely I think just trialing whatever you're passionate about, whether that's drawing, trying out coding or 3D modelling even. If you're getting familiar with these programs and the softwares and practicing it, that'll definitely prepare you for anything. So if you want to go to uni, you'll have a head start on some people. Find what you're really passionate about first. If you're an artist, build that folio and get it out there. Share it with as many people as you can, and you never know who's going to see it. Look in coding, just have a fiddle and see what you can do and just get your stuff out there. This industry is changing and it is evolving constantly, and I think it's definitely one of the front runners for inclusivity. And so it doesn't matter who you are, what colour your skin is, what background you are, what gender, what race you identify as. Everyone can do it, and the only thing holding you back is yourself. If you don't feel confident, then that's what's stopping you. So just do what you can to get it out there and give it a go, because I'm sure there will be somebody who loves what you do.
Yeah, thanks very much. And as I said, please, if you have any questions throughout the day, please ask them through our chat, and we'll be happy to answer those. To test it first and foremost, if you can actually respond in the chat where you're actually located today and where you're actually joining us from would be much appreciated, so we can know whereabouts you are and whereabouts you're located. And we'll look at our first presentation, and it is from Ben Harmon from Gravy Stained Pants, and he'll tell you about himself and how he got into games, and also some of the other interesting things that he does. I'll just get that video started and we'll get going.
I'm a freelance graphic designer and artist at Gravy Stained Pants. I'd just like to say thanks to David from Ligara for putting this event on today. GamEd is a really great place to get resources and information on interesting career paths. Today you'll be hearing from a lot of really interesting people from the games industry and how they reached this point. There's a lot to learn and a lot to gather from it. Today I'll be talking about my personal journey and how I reached this point in my career where I launched my business, Gravy Stained Pants, and started doing freelance graphic designer and working for myself. I go through all the trials and tribulations to how I reached this point. So appropriately, I decided to call my talk, What the Hell Am I Doing? 10 Years of Following My Gut. So it all started back in high school. During this time, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do with myself. I knew I wanted to get into the creative fields, but I didn't really know where or how. But what I ended up doing is that I picked up a camera and I started making a lot of art. And this was stuff that was just really fun and interesting to me. I didn't really plan on selling it. I didn't really know if it was going to mean anything in the long run, but it was a lot of joy and a lot of fun to do. I got into skateboarding and music and sci-fi, and I ended up just making stuff that reflected those interests. So if you look into my slides, you will notice that down the bottom I'll have a little exclamation mark, and this just points out on reflection, what I think was the key thing that I learned during these periods of exploration. So if you look down the bottom, look at what interests you and follow your curiosities, which is exactly what I did. I didn't really overthink it, I just did it because it was interesting. So I graduated high school and had to do something. I tried to get into fine arts, but I didn't end up getting into it. So I decided to go and pursue photography. I was photographing my friends skateboarding, so it made sense to go study it. So got into photography in 2009 and dropped out at the end of 2009. Ended up washing cars for a few years. But I gained a lot from that. I pursued something that I liked, and it didn't work out, but that's okay. What I learned is that I didn't want to become a commercial photographer. But I also built skills about how to use a camera, composition, subject matter, and exploring all these really key ideas. But it wasn't for me, and that's okay. So I had to sort of think about, well, what am I going to do next? I really enjoyed doing design and 2D art in high school. So I thought about going off and doing graphic design. So I did. In 2010, I got a diploma in graphic design. And during this time, I really learned a lot about visual design and illustration, but ultimately, I didn't want to become a graphic designer. It had the same effect as the photography. It didn't feel right to me. And I felt like the creative aspect of design would be taken away by the commercialization of it. But I built a lot of really interesting skill sets. So during this time, I learned as much as I could about the thing that interested me. But ultimately, these skills really stayed with me. And they're transferable. And this applies to anything that you're doing with your life and going on that journey of exploring where and what you want to do with your life. So if you want to become a brickie, go off and try it. There's no harm in doing a bit of trade work there and finding if you like it and building a bit of a skill set there. Or if you want to become a doctor or anything, or a video game developer, it's quite easy to get into it and just try things. You don't even need to get paid for it, you just do it at home and give it a go. But those skills that you dip your toe into can transfer across multiple fields, which is what I did. So I didn't want to become a graphic designer, so I decided to go off and become a game designer. So I went to RMIT and studied video game design for 3 years. And I finally found out what I wanted to do with my life. But I was a pretty bad game designer and game artist. As you can see from my work here, it's okay, but it's a bit sloppy and it's all just learning how to do things. But I really built a strong skill set there and an understanding of game development. And I had to make 10 bad things before I made one good thing. But each time I made something and tried something, information and skill building. If you see down the bottom left there, you'll see a image of a shark and a fish and two dudes holding a shotgun. So this was one of my second year projects. It was probably my strongest piece that I made and was quite proud of it. And I had a lecturer actually say that I should probably go off and try and make it even better, which is what I did. So when I graduated university, I went off and made my first commercial product, which was called Ready Aimed Fish. I was stacking shelves at IGA to pay for the bills and working in the state library making a video game. It was very painful and very tough to do, but at the end of 2015, I released this video game. My objectives with this was to really understand how to ship a product, how to finish something, but also hopefully get a job from it. And the key thing that I learned during this is that you need to finish things and give it to the world in some capacity. And you'll learn a lot from that. What I learned is that it's really hard to make a video game. But that knowledge really paid off, and that releasing of the product really paid off in the end. And I ended up getting a job in the games industry. So a studio reached out to me because they needed a 2D artist. I had released a game, I had the graphic design experience, I was ready to take on this job. And so we released a video game called Putty Pals on Nintendo Switch. And it was a really big deal for me, and it was a really exciting time. I learned a lot about working with a team, how to run a business, and how to network and make friends within the industry. So the key thing that I learned during this is that when you see an opportunity, go for it with absolute dedication. I knew this is what I wanted to do, and I had all the groundwork ready to apply that. But during 2019, I started to feel creatively a bit lost and started to lose my connection with the video game industry because I felt like I'd already fully explored that. But what I ended up doing is making a lot of art. I had, at this point, about 8 years of experience under my belt and decided to go off and enter some art that I made in my spare time while I was an art director at the studio to see what happens. So I released a few booklets. So if you can see in the slides here, there's a little booklet there called Steve, which is this really quirky, wacky book of this photographs of this bloke called Steve. It's just photos of him. And I just made it to be really silly, didn't take it seriously. But I had a lot of experience under my belt to make it really good. And because of that, people really started to like the work that I was producing. And this is actually a really good point. This is where Gravy Stain Pants actually came to life. I was working under this alias called Gravy Stain Pants because I really wanted to make something that was really silly, non-commercial, but really kind of mean away, which is all kind of weird and wacky and reflected the art that I was doing. And actually, I'll point out how I got the name Gravy Stain Pants. I didn't even name myself or my business Gravy Stain Pants. The first art show that I entered, I realised that all the other artists had aliases that they were working under. So not using their real name, using a alternative name. So I remember turning to my workmate and saying, "Hey mate, can you just give me an alias, anything off the top of your head, whatever you want?" And he said, "Gravy Stain Pants," and it stuck. And so I went off and made this logo and made that little booklet called Steve and made a video game and did a lot of illustration in my spare time as I was working as an art director. And I just really had a lot of freedom and got to make a lot of cool art. And I also got to develop a personal style. So the key point that I learned during this period was use your developed skill and apply it to the things that you enjoy doing. And this applies to anything that you're doing in your life. When you reach that point where you have a skill set, apply it to something you really care about. And you may not be making money from it at the start, but you possibly can. And that's exactly what I did. I went freelance. So I quit my job as an art director at the game studio and started doing graphic design. I went full circle from not dropping out from graphic design, but completing my graphic design course and then not being able to get into the industry and not really keen on it, to actually releasing and launching my own business. And it is a really cool experience. I have complete creative freedom of who and when I want to work. I get to work with really cool people. I work with a lot of people from the games industry because I had already built up that network. And I get to do things on my own terms. I get to make a lot of really interesting art, and it's quite fulfilling. And the thing that I've really learned during this period is that I can go off and do the thing that I really love now. But ultimately, the question is, after all of this, do I know what the hell I'm doing? And the answer to that is, sort of, kind of, maybe. I don't know. But that's okay. I'm still learning lessons and will continue to learn lessons. I'm still making mistakes and will continue to make mistakes. And I'm still releasing content and will continue to release content. So my summary here is, everything that you attempt, fail at, and accomplish will be your guide to finding out what you want to do. Follow your gut. That's all you can really do at the end of the day. You can have a lot of people telling you do this and do that, but if you're not into it, you're not going to give it 100%. So thank you for listening to my talk. If you want to contact me, you can contact me at hello@gravystainedpants.com, or you can check out my website called gravystainedpants.com. Cheers, guys. Enjoy the rest of the talks and have a good one. See ya.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. What I'll do is I'm going to hand it over to Ben so he can answer any of your questions if you'd like to ask them through the chat. And Ben can speak to you live himself from Castlemaine and tell you a bit more about what he does. So bear with me a moment and I'll get that organised and we'll get Ben on stage. Not a problem. I think you're right. I think I'm live. So I'm just So I'd just like to introduce you to Ben Harmon, and I'll get out and Ben can have a discussion live with you.
Cheers, David. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Hope you enjoyed my talk. I'll go through and answer a couple of questions. So Alexander asked, I want to know what it's like to be a creative in the bush. So I was originally, when I was doing the video, I was doing that in Melbourne. And then I actually decided to move out to Trentham to start doing my development stuff out there. So it was remote working. So yeah, there's some really good pros and cons to working remotely. So one of the pros is that I get to go out and do hikes on my lunch break and get to sort of be really quite peaceful in nature and all that sort of stuff. The downside though is that it's quite hard to connect and be up to date with what's going on in Melbourne with all the art shows and all the creative things going on there. So there is a bit of payoff. But yeah, you're just going to make that extra effort to get out there. Another question was, what subjects did I do in Year 12? So I did English and general maths, and then I did 3 creative subjects. So I did Viscom, studio art, and art. And that wasn't actually recommended to me. All my teachers were saying, don't do that because you won't be able to get a job from that. But I didn't really connect with anything else apart from the creative subjects. So yeah, it really paid off in the end and get to do a creative work. So I proved wrong. Another question. So what engine did I use? So when I was working with the studio in Melbourne, we were using 2 different game engines. We were using Unity and Unreal. And then for when I was doing my personal stuff, I was using Unreal. The 2 different people who don't know what a game engine is where pretty much all the different disciplines, so programming and artists and musicians, put all their content into one space to make the game come to life. So yeah, the 2 different engines that I used was Unity and Unreal. And yeah, so Unity is quite a flexible engine, but there is a bit of a learning curve. I found Unreal to be really good for my solo work though. So Melissa was asking, how did I organize myself to complete your work on time for doing 3 folio subjects? Yeah, it was pretty tough. How did I do it? I can't actually remember. It's going back 12 years. Yeah, it was really full on. And I had a pretty good support from my art teachers. They knew that I was doing 3 subjects. And I remember reaching out to them for support to get into it. But yeah, a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights. So David, he's asking what counterculture is. So in my bio, I'm not sure if it was posted there, but so Gravy Stained Pants originally started out as a counterculture design exercise. So what and that's basically all the stuff that I'm making at the moment is very counterculture. So I'll go into that a bit. So counterculture is a term that is used for periods throughout history where people and movements occurred that was against the norm and what was typically, I guess, trendy in a way. So a really good example of this is the Beat Generation, which was in around the 50s, where these guys were doing beat poetry and were into really experimental things. And then you had the hippie generation, so in the 60s, it was all peace and love. And then in the 70s, you had the punk culture movement. So yeah, a lot of my inspiration is sourced from all those really interesting movements. Definitely more around the punk movement and the yeah. So the hippie movement and the punk movement were very much like influential to Gravy Stained Pants. So a lot of my work is all about trying to do something that is against the norm. Hence why I really wanted to use the name Gravy Stained Pants, because it's just such a ridiculous name. And it really stands out, but it really fundamentally explains my approach as a designer and as a creative, especially with all the art that I made. So, for example, Steve, got the little booklet here. If people want to have a quick look at it, I'll open it up just so you get a better idea. But it's literally just photos of this bloke doing stuff. There he is, doing his washing. I know, reading a book. And it just ends. It ends on this, him doing some guitar and washing. So, yeah, that's very counterculture, this. So, yeah, Melissa asks, can you design your process a bit? How do you brainstorm? So, yeah, I've got a really strong process down now, especially now that I'm dealing with clients and studios. So having a really strong process is quite critical. So, good one, Steve. um, my process. So I really like to break things into phases, because design at the end of the day is all about gaining information and honing in on a really key concept. So when you are approached by a client and they say, "Can you make me a logo?" That is a very broad thing to start out with. A logo can look like anything. So I start by breaking it down into a phase, and I start the concepting phase. So that's where I talk to the client, get the ideas down. What are they looking for? And then I make a bunch of different concepts based on a bunch of words and things that they have requested. And I try and make those different concepts really quite different. Then I present to the client, and they get back to me and say yes to that one, no to that one, or maybe I to completely miss the mark and don't get it right at all. But the idea is that I get information on where we're sort of honing in on. So based off that information, I start closing the gap in on what the final product would be. And this is a really great process. You can apply it to anything, your own personal creative work. If you're a little bit lost on where you want to take a particular piece, just do some really quick concepting. Having words is really appropriate. So having words up on what you want to achieve on the wall, for example, like on my wall, I have Post-it notes everywhere. So I was dealing with something at the moment which was very 90s focused. So I had stuff about the 90s up on the wall. So loud and exciting colors and edgy and all these really interesting things. Cool. So Aiden's asking Xbox One or PS4. Neither. PC. I probably will get a PS4 when the PS5 comes out, though, because it'll be a bit cheaper and catch up on all the games that came out over the past few years. One piece of advice for students who want to start in games or tech. Okay, so Margarita asks, one piece of advice for students who want to start in games or tech, please. So one piece of advice. Get creating. Doing all this stuff, like in tech and games, is really accessible. If you have a computer and an internet connection, there is free resources out there and free platforms for you to start learning how to do this. All the engines that I mentioned before were completely free. You can start using them. YouTube is your friend. You can go out and get resources on that and tutorials. That is the best place to start. And like I was talking in my speech about, trying things, that's one place you could start doing it and getting information on whether you want to pursue something or not without having a huge investment up front, like a university degree or a huge sort of upfront cost. Lisa, you do. Yeah, so Melissa, that's correct. Yeah, definitely having a good plan is always really important to completing things, anything. So stepping stones is how I like to look at it as well. So phases, stepping stones, anything where you move from one section to another, and each time really honing in. So any other questions, anyone? I think that's it, David. I reckon I'll hand it off to you then, mate.
No, not a problem. And I sort of just seeing Melissa's last comment there about having a really good plan as a starting point going forward. Could not agree any more with that. And maybe that's a potential further workshop, and we can either look at getting that out there for students who are interested in that plan, and whether it's a business plan, whether it's for design or getting into using some of the engines, or looking at potential real world problems within the local communities as well. So we can have a look at doing that as well. Yeah, so thanks very much, Ben, for your time. What I'm going to do next is I'll start Alexander's presentation. And Alexander's quite an interesting fellow, a narrative designer. He'd probably tell you off if you call him a writer. He's a narrative designer, and we'll listen to Alexander and his journey. And once again, at the end of that, we'll have Alexander, available for some questions and go a little bit more in depth to what he does and fill some of those interesting questions that you've had come through our chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexander Swords, a writer and narrative designer in games. First of all, writing, you might have some idea what that is, hopefully. But narrative design is probably maybe something that you haven't heard of before. So writing in games, which is sometimes what I do, is story, characters, dialogue, and in-game text. So that's a lot of the more traditional types of writing which end up in games. Narrative design is a little bit different. It's specifically telling the story with gameplay, mechanics, level design, cinematics. So it's moving away from traditional ideas of what storytelling is and how we tell those stories and write to tell those stories in, say, film or television, and more to do with specifically using some of the stuff that's unique to games and interactivity. It's also about designing story systems in particular, which sounds kind of tedious and boring, and sometimes it is. But because these are completely artificially created environments, we need to decide how the story is told. So it's easy enough to say that dialogue exists, but what does that look like? How do you interact with it? Is it text? Is it voice? All those decisions need to be made and designed at some point. And then lots of other things depending on the game. Each project is different. Each game has different ways that they can tell story. So sometimes I end up responsible for a whole bunch of things, from casting, working with actors, voice recording. Sometimes I work with the artists directly about some of the stuff that we're creating for a game. All that kind of ends up being a part of the job. So whereas writing can be quite narrow in the way that it's described, narrative design can end up being anything, basically, to tell story in games. And I just want to talk about my career path because I think it's really important to know how I got here. I think a lot of people have this idea that, you maybe go into high school, go to game school, and then you become a game designer. I certainly didn't do that, and I'd say you don't need to do that. You've got a whole bunch of different ways to get into the industry, and there's no rush either. So if you have any other interests in your life and anything else that you're looking at, then there's no point. It's not necessary to give those up to end up in games, because it all helps. So I wasn't born with these skills, obviously. I didn't go to game school, and I don't have a games degree. And one of the cool things about the industry is there's a lot of on-the-job learning. The industry is pretty good with recognizing skills as they're developed, however they're developed. So actually needing a degree itself is not necessarily crucial for success in the industry. But of course, particularly if you want to get into programming or game design specifically, then they can certainly help. And sometimes it's also about the network you create and the friends that you make while you're doing those degrees. So I finished high school as a working class army brat. If you don't know what that is, army brats are kids of people in the army. So my dad was in the army. We moved around a lot, both in regional Australia as well as in the cities sometimes. And then I graduated in a place called Maryborough in Queensland, which is about north of southeast Queensland, I guess. It's a very small town in the middle of nowhere on the Queensland coast. And I did English, drama, biology, film and television, ancient history, and maths. And I have to say I'm glad that I paid attention, because there isn't any one of those subjects that hasn't been useful at some point. the advantage of being a writer and working with story is sometimes you end up in all sorts of really cool places. And so, sometimes I need to know something about ancient history, or at least know where to find stuff or what terms to use. Same with biology. There's some really cool stuff that's come out of what I remember learning in high school. That's led to some really cool ideas in game design and game story. So it's all been good. Then I went to film school, did a 3-year degree, and that was good for understanding narrative, telling stories, all the stuff you'd expect at film school. I guess it also helped a bit with understanding, how to give a cinematic quality to a story. But I think even more importantly, understanding audiences, that's really, really important. Whenever you're making anything creative, it's understanding who you're trying to create it for. Understanding what they want, understanding how they also understand things themselves, and also how to work with other people in a team is hugely important. And especially when you're working on anything creative as well, because there has to be communication, there has to be compromise. You have to learn how to work together. And then I was really lucky. I worked on Big Brother seasons 4 through to 6. That was my first job out of university, and I have to say that I was really lucky. There was almost no skill involved with going about talking to Big Brother about getting that job. But what I was able to do was make the most of that opportunity as it came up. Basically, I just emailed them, and then I had the skills to back up that email afterwards, after applying myself at university. It was cool because it was actually the first game that I worked on, strangely enough. It took me a while to realize that. I keep saying that I've only been in games for 4 years, but technically working in the control room of Big Brother was the first game that I worked on. And I really got to understand people, both the people in front of the cameras, because people are fascinating. And there's all sorts of dynamics there, and obviously it's a game and everyone's watched. It was like watching, someone playing The Sims to a certain degree, except of course they were real people. But also I really got to understand the people around me because we were working 10-hour days, 5 days a week. That's a lot of time to be spending with your team. And so I got to really understand, what motivates people, and, getting a job is not always just about money and job security, although those things are important. It's also about morale and happiness and creativity and, all those good things that we get out of a positive working environment. And then I went to retail because I didn't want to work in reality TV for the rest of my life. Look, it has its challenges, of course, because it's a retail job. I worked in a clothing store and then a shoe store, and then I worked in Officeworks. And even though obviously it's a lot less glamorous than, say, working in reality TV or on Big Brother, it was definitely, these jobs are some of the most useful jobs that I ever had. It definitely helped with the introvertedness because I am an introvert. It's taken a long time for me to get very comfortable talking to people, especially strangers. And retail was very helpful with that because I got practice on, how to relate to people very quickly, and just how to talk to people in general, I guess. One of the key things too is like how to communicate via features and benefits. I know that sounds really dry, but basically that just means, being able to go, look, it does a good thing. And that in itself is great, highlighting that, whatever they might be interested in or whatever game you might be making has a good thing in it, is helpful. But if you can't explain why, if you can't get the person that you're talking to relate to why that might be helpful to them, then you're only halfway there to selling to them. And I don't mean necessarily selling in a retail environment. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to a team member or whether you're trying to talk to a publisher if you're in games, or you're trying to talk to someone about buying your game. You need to be able to get them to connect with whatever it is that you're talking about. If you're talking internally, then your team members need to understand your ideas and not just what the features are, but also the benefits. How do your ideas benefit the entire team and the game project? And again, that's not game specific. Those sorts of skills will help you through everything, really. Also, how to actively listen. Hugely important. Most important skill ever, because it's a lot easier to do all the talking stuff, but it's a lot harder to actively listen. And by actively listen, I mean really pay attention to what the person is saying, and then asking questions of them to find out, what they're saying and what that means, and how they feel about things. Then I did a whole bunch of different work across venues, so that's festivals, like film festivals and comedy festivals, arts organizations like film festivals, and then I also did some short film stuff as well. Made a couple of short films with a few people, ran my own events. That was really helpful for organization and planning, understanding audience experiences. Then I went into a marketing job, which also sounds kind of boring, and in some ways it was, because I was like, the first marketing job that I had was helping an organization help companies run big fleets of cars and trucks. And then, though, I worked for the organization that trains surgeons, and that was cool. But, again, it's not necessarily glamorous or in games or film for that matter. But I was able to learn a lot there. So, statistics are really important. Games in particular is about numbers and what they call analytics, which is how to understand a whole bunch of different things to do with games, including how they're going, in sales, and how to communicate to people en masse, and what that kind of looks like to be able to effectively do that and help people understand why they may need to care about something they wouldn't necessarily even think about. And then bodies are cool. That was the real benefit of working with the College of Surgeons, because I got to talk about some really cool stuff with the body. And that's also been really useful in games, about how bodies move and what they can and can't do, and how it feels sometimes to do certain things. So, it's all useful. And then I ended up in games. And I was lucky enough to have a really supportive mum that helped me get over to Berlin. And I took the opportunity to have a crack at getting in games. So this was a little while ago, and our games industry was not as strong as it is now. So there wasn't really that much of an opportunity to, as a narrative person, to get into games back then. Things are very, very different now for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I'll get into in a hot second. But I've been now in the games industry specifically for 4 years, working solid. And I just want to say, every single one of those jobs, even the ones that were challenging or a bit boring at times, all of them had really good things to learn that have helped me in games immensely. Especially now that I'm considering developing my own game. So these are the games that I'm working on at the moment. The one on the left is Totem Teller. You can find out more at totemteller.com. It's a very colourful, fantastic adventure through a fable, a fairy tale. And then the other game is Anytown Garrett Sale Monsters, and that's a bit like Stardew Valley, if you know that one. Where it's a young boy who has moved to a new town, and it's about making friends and playing card games. The other thing I'm doing is I've developed something called the Forest Paths method of narrative design. That probably sounds really dry, but basically it means it's a way for everyone to tell stories in games. I'm a firm believer that everyone can and should be telling stories in games. And the cool thing is, at the moment, this helps you develop really simple ideas and then use the tools which are available for you to make games right now. So just a little quick how-to to get you started. This is what I start off with when I'm thinking about narrative design for a game. And the main things are, these across the top. So the first thing is the character, who the player needs to know who they are in any given moment. They need to know what they can do. So that's the gameplay. and they need to know what they want, what they're trying to achieve, and that's the goal. So in this game that I've just quickly thrown together, we've got a quokka with invisibility powers, and it's a girl, and she's 14. And she's able to move and investigate and explore, perhaps invisibly sometimes. And what she's trying to do is solve the mystery of the disappearing salt bush. So cool. I take a simple concept like that, and then I start planning it out. And for that, we just use a very simple flowchart. So story, gameplay, goal. You see here, this says story instead of character. That's because the story is what the character is doing. And then we start just putting up some squares and then start putting in the information about the game that we're making. So here, we've got the Super Quokka. She's going to school. And then Wally the Wombat falls over in front of her. And then she has a choice about whether to help Wally up and walk her to school, or maybe doesn't help Wally get to school. And, you've already got a game forming there. You've got, a good beginning here with what the story is about. Then you have an interesting choice and then some different outcomes based on that choice. And if you want to get into this sort of thing, you can start this afternoon. I use a program called a website called diagrams.net, and it runs a program which allows you to make flowcharts like this, and it's free. So you literally could start this afternoon. And then you can make it, which is even cooler because there's a game engine. A game engine is a bit of software that allows you to create a game. There's a very simple one that allows you to create interactive stories called Twine. So if you go to twinery.org, you can make a very simple interactive fiction or story in an afternoon or a weekend, depending on how much you want to put into it. And so I've got here just a little quick through from the same scenario that I just put up there before, a little quick video. So you just go to the website. You can use it online, so you don't need to download anything. And then all you need to do is go over to the right, create a new story, give it a title. So Super Quokka saves the saltbush. Typing speed's a little bit slow today. And now we have a new story. Now the first part there is just the beginning of the story. So we just whack a little bit of text in there to explain what happens at the beginning of the story. And it's as simple as it looks. You double click on it, you start typing some text. In a second it gets just ever so tiny, a little bit tricky. When you're creating choices, you just need to put 2 square brackets around what you want the choices to be called. So here the first choice is to help Wally. So I just put 2 brackets around either side, and that turns into a link. And then keep walking is the other choice, 2 brackets around it, and now they're links. And then when we close that, we now have the 2 nodes that we need to provide the choices to the player. So we can jump in here, put a little bit of text to explain what's going on. So Super Quokka helps Wally up, and on their way to school, he tells her about the secret headquarters. He has been tunneling underneath his home. Cool, we can close that, jump over to the next node. We'll put in a little bit more text to explain what happens when Super Quokka keeps walking. And I keep misspelling Quokka because in my head it should be Q-U-A, but it's Q-U-O. So Super Quokka walks past. She feels a little guilty, but well, he's tough. He can get up himself, But she sees some dirt on his shirt. So, a little bit of mystery, something to keep the story going forward after this point. And then I just need to give the start node a start title. And there we go. And now we have a really simple beginning to a game. You can test it, so you just hit the play button, and then there it is. It's like an interactive story with links to the different sections and different results. And the cool thing is you can also save this to a file and then share it with your friends as well, or put it online. It's up to you. So it really is that simple. That didn't take very long at all. So that's it for now. Useful info. Like I said, planning diagrams can be done using diagrams.net for free to get you started. And the program that I was just using is available online at twinery.org, again for free as well. And most importantly, if you want to write stories in games, then you need to start writing stories in games, and then you need to keep writing stories in games. So obviously, life happens, things happen. The cool thing about Twine is it's super easy to use. It's very easy to write in. So I don't get to do as much creative stuff anymore in Twine, but I use it to test out my ideas all the time. And part of that is because, I can do it on my laptop, I can do it on my phone, I can do it wherever I need to do it, and it's fun. You see things straight away, and then you're able to export it and show it to friends or colleagues, depending on, who needs to see, and then you get feedback. So that's it from me for now, and now we'll go back over to the real me. To take some questions.
Hello, thanks very much for paying attention to Alexander's presentation, and I hope you can see both of us at the moment. And if you've got any questions for Alexander, please ask away in the chat, and we'll be happy to ask them for you. I did have one, Alexander, in your bio. You mentioned around the health of individuals as well. That's what you do, or that part of what you do is listening and talking to other people. And can you explain this a little bit further?
Yeah, that's around taking care of players mostly, because we put them through, in games, we put them through a really intense experience sometimes, and it's really important to understand what that experience is and what they might need to actually enjoy that experience, because games can get into like pretty intense kind of territory, especially with some of the games that have lots of violence in them, or dealing with any kind of really strong adult issues. So some of the work that I do is about making sure that players understand the experience that they're about to go into, that they are actually making a choice about whether they do want that kind of experience. And then afterwards, that they're not just kind of bounced out into the real world without kind of getting an opportunity to really kind of reflect on the experience that they kind of had. We see some of the more toxic kind of experiences in games, particularly multiplayer games, because the games haven't been designed to take care of people's mental health sometimes. So the games put them in this state of excitement, and sometimes even good excitement can kind of get them in this state. And it's the weird thing about being basically a passenger in a meat bag is that sometimes the meat bag doesn't really know, it can't tell, the difference between good stress and bad stress. And so it just feels like stress. And then that has outcomes once the person's kind of finished the game. So what I try and make sure is that when I am designing experiences that we're thinking about the effect on the player before they start playing the game. So, what they might need to enjoy the experience, and then afterwards to make sure that they're leaving that experience in a healthy state mentally.
Cool, thank you. We do have a question from Aidan. What would you write a sci-fi or sci-fi story or fantasy story?
Would I? Absolutely. Sci-fi and fantasy is my jam. I really like how sci-fi and fantasy in particular can kind of really concentrate on any kind of particular part of what it is to be a human being and kind of investigate that, but still keep it in a way that's actually quite approachable. So which one? You're demanding that I choose? How dare you? Look, if I had to choose, it'd have to be sci-fi, I think. But I think the best stories that I've actually read they've come across like a fantasy, and then there's been some kind of science fiction kind of explanation about how they've evolved. And that's really interesting too, because then you're able to look at, say, two different sides of which Star Wars. No, I would not work on Star Wars. That thing is huge. That's too intimidating. I'm enjoying at the moment doing smaller stories, a more kind of people level kind of stories about things, so about human relationships and that type of stuff. There's plenty of other amazing narrative people working on those really big kind of monolithic kind of titles. I would like to just there's a question from Melissa before that I just don't want to let go about tips for creating creative pieces. Yeah, absolutely. What I make sure to do, especially, I mean, I do it for myself because I have really bad memory, but it's also very good for if you're working with collaborative in teams. And a lot of creative stuff these days, particularly in games, is collaborative. Is putting things out there on paper and making sure that there's visibility for what your kind of thought process is. And to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter how you structure it. The most important thing is if something inspires you, so maybe you want to write a story about an artwork, then grab that artwork, put it in a flowchart program, start putting in notes about what it is that inspires you about that particular, that particular artwork or whatever it is that's inspiring you. Do things like create playlists that put you in the mood or the zone that you want to be in while you're doing creation as well, but also don't do that blindly. Create the playlist, and then once it's together, then try and think about why or how this music is helping you kind of get into that mood and connect you with whatever it is that you're trying to create. Because at the moment, I'm finding it really difficult because one of the things that I find helps my creativity is actually connecting with people and being inspired by their ideas. And because we're all so isolated at the moment, that can actually be a really difficult thing to do. So one way of kind of overcoming that is, these really cool ideas that I'd usually be able to kind of, chat about in a place like the arcade where I work, which is a co-working space with a bunch of other game designers. Instead, I can put this stuff into a flowchart or any kind of program, doesn't matter if it's Word or whatever, and then share it with people, get feedback, chat about ideas, and then have those ideas also incorporated into what you're inspired about as well. And it's also a way of kind of helping understand who your audience is for a piece as well, because sometimes you'll show, if I'm working on something and I've got a reference artwork, for instance, and then I've made some notes, I might show that to someone else in my team or anyone else. And then I can get feedback from that. And even if the feedback isn't necessarily that they may not actually be responding to it, perhaps that maybe the content is it's more that they're not your audience for your content as well, and then you can have that discussion about what it is about that particular reference that might be problematic or that they might be excited about. But mainly it's just about getting it down and making it visible and thinking through your thoughts. The other thing is a bit like what Ben was talking about before. Try and work out what your process is. Really think about when you do something and it feels good. Don't just go, cool, it's some magical kind of, mystery pixie dust that's come from the sky to help you be creative. Okay, there's something that, that you brought into that experience that actually helped you with that success. So reflect on that. I know it's a big thing for a lot of arts assignments in particular to write a diary. Don't worry, I hated them as well. But I actually realized now that I'm a bit older and I'm actually in the industry that that's actually been really super important. And one of the best things that's given me confidence in doing what I do is actually understanding that process. And it's also stopped any kind of creative block, because if I feel blocked on something, I can just go, oh, okay, where am I in my creative process? Right, this is the next thing that I need to try. Or maybe, one of the three things that I might want to try with.
Thanks very much, Alexander. Aidan, just to echoing there a little bit. What we might do, Aidan, is we'll look at answering that last question. Just mindful of time, and we do have two other speakers to present and showcase their views and what they do. So if we could answer Aidan's question through the chat, Alexander, that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, no worries.
Now is introduce you to our next speaker, which is Elise from Samurai Punk. So we'll go, get into it, and we'll continue with our day. Thank you very much.
Aw, baby's hungry. We need to let Mommy know. Knock on the door a few times to get her attention. Oh, hello there. My name is Buddy Washington. We've constructed a fantastic world of wonder and joy that sets its sights on a future where guns become an integral part of the lives of all good American patriots. You will learn to live life to the fullest with a full magazine and a host of powerful firearms. Guns aren't just useful for combating tyranny and oppression. They also can be used for familial bonding, cleaning the house, preparing delicious meals, dancing, tending to the garden, fine dining, delivering newborn babies, and so much more. Come on down. Join me and experience our vision of the world of tomorrow. What makes America great? Is it the sweat of our brow? Is it the beautiful land upon which we built our home? No, it is the ability for any man to achieve whatever he sets out to do with the tools of his great nation. Welcome to the American Dream!
Hey everyone, my name is Nicholas McDonald. I'm the managing director and co-founder at Samurai Punk. These days I actually am more of a jack of all trades, so I handle our business development as well as some programming, prototyping, art, but I'm primarily more in a management role. We have been making games since 2014, but before that I was studying at university, learning how to make games there, but also doing a lot of game jams on the side. Before I was in high school, I was more of an artist. So it was really university that got me into actually like producing digital games. But I've always been a fan of games since I was a kid. Thanks.
So ignore the crazy lockdown here, but I guess a brief history of me would be that I went to high school in the country. We moved there from the city when I was in late primary school. Went to a fairly good high school there, and I was just playing around with Flash games and those sort of things in high school, Photoshop, Blender, those sort of programs, and decided I probably wanted to do game dev. So I looked into courses and decided to do a 4-year double degree of like software engineering and game design multimedia sort of thing at Swinburne, because I sort of liked the art side and also the programming side, so that felt like a good balance. I was lucky enough to get into that course and also started working part-time as a web designer slash like front-end developer while I was at uni, and ended up doing a full year of placement at that web startup and worked for them for a couple of years after that. And then as part of our final year degree, we had to form a team like of students and make like a capstone game. And me and a few friends decided to take that capstone game that we made forward and start a company. And we then worked on that for another year and a half, maybe. We managed to get some government funding to sort of hire someone else onto the team. And then the four of us basically pushed it over the line to launch on PlayStation, Xbox, Steam with like crossplay online and stuff like that. And we then supported that for another 6 months to a year and ported to Switch. And then we're sort of looking at what to do next. And we've been working with Samurai Punk in the same office space. And I went to uni with a few of them as well, so we were already friends. And they had some work that they thought I would be a good fit for. So I just decided to accept some work and slowly made my way into the team. I would definitely say, just playing around with stuff, whatever you can, will always, it might not feel like you're improving or that you are working your way towards somewhere, but you'll look back on what you did like a month or 2 months ago and you'll be like, oh, actually I did make some improvements. So it was worth just like continuing on trying stuff. And eventually, if you're persistent and people reach out and they give you the opportunities, then you're in a better position to take these opportunities the more stuff you've done on your own time. And I've been lucky in my position, obviously, but I think hopefully if we continue as an industry to move forward and give more people opportunities, that there will be more chances for other people to do the same thing.
Hey, my name's Callum. I'm one of the artists at Samurai Punk. I've been working here for around 2 years, and before that I was a contractor. I worked as a contractor for around 6 months when we were working on the remaster of our game Screen Sheet. So what do? A lot of my job encompasses kind of different stuff like 3D modeling and character concept art. And it also goes into stuff like photography and game design depending on the day. I didn't really decide that I wanted to do something like this as a job until I kind of finished high school. The main reason I decided to study a games course is pretty similar to a lot of other people, and that's like video games were a big part of my life since I was a kid, and they kind of were a very personal thing to me, as well as I was really into making art and drawing a lot, so that was a big influence into why I decided to do it. It was pretty early on in the course that I realized how much I liked the process of making a game. I really liked the teamwork that it required, and the challenges it had were really rewarding. During high school, I really struggled to find something that made me motivated to learn. And I think the early experiences that I had at uni really showed me what could happen if I pushed myself, really pushed myself to learn more and put in energy into something that was important to me. So I would say that was really the point that really got me into making games. So yeah, thanks.
Hello, does that work? Oh, sorry, one sec.
Sorry, yes, I am. Elise, we've got 5 minutes. If you could, just talk a little bit more about what you do and your journey, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. So I went to a pretty small school in Melbourne. So our graduating year was like 40 or 50 students. So it's pretty small overall. I didn't really have a very clear direction when I was younger as to what I wanted to do at university. My grandfather is an artist, and so he always encouraged me. Like, I was doing painting classes since I was like 7 or 8. So I always knew I wanted to do something creative. And then when it came to high school, I was completely lost. I had no idea. It seemed like a lot of people knew what they wanted to do, which to me seemed crazy for like a 16-year-old kid to know what they want to spend the rest of their life doing. So yeah, I did a few folio subjects. So I did art and graphic design, and then to try and get out of sports classes on Wednesdays, I did a 2-year TAFE course in fashion and applied technology as well. But my parents were insistent that I do a maths and a science just so that I had all the doors open. So I did that, and I ended up working really hard in high school, which paid off. I towards the end of year 12 decided to apply for a games degree, and because I had worked really hard through all of year 11 and 12, I actually got a scholarship to go to that university. So that was pretty cool, but it was pretty scary because it was a small private games uni, and basically every student from my high school went to Monash or Melbourne. So it was a little scary to go out on my own outside of my little Jewish community that I've been so snuggled up with for so long. But yeah, so I studied a degree it was a Bachelor of Interactive Entertainment with a major in games design. And I chose that degree specifically because it did a little bit of programming, a little bit of art, a little bit of design, testing, everything. So I thought that would be a good opportunity to get a bit more well-rounded. But when I finished university, I was kind of mid-tier on everything. I wasn't the best artist, I wasn't the best programmer, I wasn't the best designer. So that was kind of a scary place to be. So I actually ended up working at EB Games for a couple of years. And I've always been a pretty hard worker, so I didn't particularly like working a casual job a couple of days a week. So I worked my way up into management as quickly as possible, which ended up actually being the biggest thing for me in getting my job at Games. Is I ended up getting a job with Big Ant Studios, who makes primarily sports games. And although I had my games degree, a massive component of it was that I had retail management experience, rather. Oh yeah, sorry, I've got my old consoles behind. But yeah, when I applied for a job as an assistant producer, they basically just asked questions that I could answer because of my retail management experience, not because of my games degree experience. So producer as a role is quite different in every company, depending on size and how many other people you have, and whether you have development directors and all those sorts of tiers. But basically, I like to fundamentally describe it as it's my job to make sure that the games get out on time and on budget, so the company can keep making money, make more money, and we can hire more talented and interesting people. So yeah, a lot of those skills basically just came from retail management. I learned how to write rosters. I learned how to manage people. I learned how to hear when people were having problems, like solve interpersonal issues and stuff. After a couple of years at Big Ant, I came up to Samurai Punk, which is a much smaller team where 9 of us, I can't remember how many was in that picture, 9, 8, it changes every day. I always knew when I was younger that I wanted a job that let me travel. Like, traveling has always been very important to me. And Samurai Punk has its own apparel line, which you saw Alexander wearing one. I'm wearing one of the t-shirts as well. So we have a lot of t-shirts and stuff that we sell. And because of that, we get the opportunity to travel. So in the space of about a year, non-COVID times, I went to New Zealand, I went to Boston, Seattle, San Francisco, all sponsored by work, which is pretty amazing because I could never afford to have those opportunities otherwise, really. And I just wanted to point out one thing that got brought up before from Ben's talk, because we actually work with Ben at the moment with Samurai Punk. And I just wanted to emphasize about the location thing. Ben is one of the most professional designers that we worked with for so long. So we could have someone who could come into our office and talk to us face to face, and it still wouldn't counteract professionalism. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, especially if you're trying to work remotely. If you can come across as professional and present yourself well and do a good job, that's always going to matter more. It doesn't matter where in the world you live. Like, we'll wake up at 5 in the morning if you're in New York and it's a weird time zone, if you're going to get the job done best for us. So I think that's an important thing worth noting for people who are wanting to look for work outside of inner city Melbourne. Yeah. People have specific questions about like production or those weird games I've played.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elise. Like you mentioned, the professionalism. So would that be one of the tips for, I suppose, the people who are joining us today to really consider getting into those good habits and working hard and being dedicated and I suppose motivated, like finding your passion. If you're really passionate about something, like you said, go after it, but also look at some of those other sideward movements. Like you said, working at EB Games and Ben's got a very interesting backstory, as he said, working in supermarkets while he funded his own way through making games and publishing and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a massive fan of that. Like, if you worked at a supermarket, because I did a lot of hiring at Big Ant, so I looked at a lot of resumes. Electronics Boutique. It's a video game retailer. But yeah, I think anyone who's worked a lot of those jobs, like, people are apprehensive to say that they worked at Macca's. I'm like, that means you can deal with customers. That means when someone's yelling in your face, you might know how to deal with that situation, which is great. Hopefully you won't work in a studio where someone is yelling at you, but you're still going to learn so many skills like that. Generally speaking, I won't hire people that don't have some of that experience. Even at EB, I noticed this, and definitely in games, when people come to me in an interview and they're like, oh, I just spent all my time playing games, I'm like, I'm not hiring you then. Like, you're not motivated to get out from behind the TV and connect with people. And making games is, unless you do it on your own, it's a collaborative process. It's important that you know how to talk to people, you know how to interact with them, you know how to be professional and respectful. And that we've hired people that aren't even that into games. Like, they're not that interested in making games or playing games. They're interested in making games, not interested in playing games, and that's fine as long as they're professional and respectful and they can do the job. That's great.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. I didn't see any questions coming through apart from Aidan's about what does EB stand for. If there are any other questions, please keep them coming through the chat. I'm just mindful of time. We do have one more presenter. So thank you very much, Elise, for your time, and I hope we'll pop up some of the links to both Gravy Stained Pants, Swords Narrative, Samurai Punk, and also Common Code for people to look at further conversations and reaching out. You can also reach out through the chat, and also myself. I'm quite happy to do that as well.
Cool, thank you.
No worries, thank you. If we can just have Stephen.
Hi.
So we've got Stephen from Common Code, and very, very much appreciated of Stephen's time as well as our other guest speakers. So Stephen's going to talk about some other roles and in tech, and I'll let him explain further what he does and part of his journey. Thank you, Stephen.
Sure, and realise we're getting a bit close to time, so if someone wants to shout out, if people have to kind of head off, I'll try to adapt this and compress it into the time we have available. Luckily, I don't have a video, so this is me live talking to you today from South Gippsland, where I've moved recently. And so I'm essentially the guy who comes in the end and says, don't do games, do real software. It's much more fun. So my background quickly is I actually did start off as a designer. So in the ancient times, in the 1990s, I finished school and I did a bit of design. I did some design stuff at school. I went and moved to a high school which had some graphic design subjects because I wanted to do most of that. And I think it's very similar to Ben. I kind of, ignored all the advice and I ignored all the advice and did all art subjects and photography, and ended up not doing very well and not going to uni because I didn't have the marks. But I kind of did what I liked, and I sort of tried to get into the film and TV industry. And I was living in Western Australia at the time, and I discovered that in the film and TV industry in WA in the 1990s, like all the people who worked there had been there since the 70s when the film industry kind of boomed in Australia, and they didn't really want to let young people in. So I found that really frustrating. So I got that experience of like bashing my head against the wall trying to get into that industry. But luckily what happened was the internet came along and I started getting more graphics work, doing web design stuff. And that kind of hooked me, and I got into that, and I moved over to Victoria and did a course at VCA in the film school, but in interactive media. And at that time, the big thing, because the internet was so slow back then, it was like really ridiculous. You couldn't even have video. So we were all doing what were called CD-ROMs. We all thought that was going to be the big thing. And CD-ROMs kind of was like an attempt to sort of like do games, but more as entertainment, like more sort of not for game people, like not much more gameplay, like sort of interactive experiences, and that was the whole big thing. And so I did one of those in my course, basically. And in the course, it was literally like here's a room full of equipment, just go for it for a year, which I loved. I love learning by doing stuff. And I made a game experience thing, which was kind of about philosophy and just these virtual rooms and people talking to you and all this sort of stuff. And it was it's pretty crazy. But it got put into Melbourne Film Festival next year, which is really cool. And so I could sort of sit, and they had a sort of like a computers, and you could go in there, people could come in there and just play with the stuff. And I got to sit on the sort of background and just watch people use my thing. And that really hooked me. I love like seeing the effect of having made something and people using it. I really love to see that. And so I kind of moved more into sort of general software. I worked in education for a while. And I also worked at Fairfax, which does The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. And I recently did a whole bunch of things. Worked for a sort of games company for a while there, doing sports stuff, but more like sports stats and kind of sort of pseudo gambling. So it wasn't that great. And then I worked for Xero, which does accounting software. And so as I kind of went through, I did less and less graphic design and picked up more and more tech stuff, and also moved into sort of management things. And what I sort of like really liked, I kind of moved away from design because I got a bit sick of the sort of superficial stuff that you can get in commercial design, where everyone just goes, yeah, great job, that's really amazing design, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't really, sometimes I did some stuff and I wasn't happy with it, because people were saying, yeah, it was great, but really they were saying it was great just because the client paid for it. So it was actually shit, to be honest. And so I kind of got more into actually the functional side of software and making things that solve problems for people. That became my thing. I think Aiden's doing an interview on the chat. Good on you. Yeah, why not? And that sort of led me to like doing Xero. Xero is like basically about making small business accounting really easy, because no one wants to do accounting. So it's like makes it all really, really, really easy for people. And now at Common Code, where I am now, it's very, very human, very focused on startups and very much on what we call tech for good, and just like finding really, really clever ways of just making technology work really quickly for people. And we're doing a lot of stuff like in the Pacific region as well. So we're working like with people in Tonga and Papua New Guinea and Fiji, and just really just like sometimes the stuff we do, like we don't even actually program stuff. We actually just I was really interested in you looking at this Tallulah app, and I'm going to get in touch with what was your name? The guy was I can't remember his name. The guy who's running Tallulah. It's like a new company. Like they're sort of involved in this presentation. And Slava, there you are. And so like, I'm really keen to talk to Slava after this, because we are working with other companies who are trying to kind of do presentations online, do events, and Sveta. And we basically what we're doing, not programming, we might do some little programming joiny bits, but they're going to end up using like YouTube streaming and like apps like this and other stuff, and some Zoom calls and some WhatsApp groups, and tie all those things together to create an online virtual event. So like they're actually producing something, some software, some experience, but just by using lots of little bits of tools. And I think that's really exciting. That's probably the biggest difference that I've seen in the last 25 years that I've been involved in stuff. Like 25 years ago, there was nothing. You had to kind of build it all yourself. And now there's just more and more of these tools which you can, they're products themselves, but you can use them to kind of create value and create experiences for other people. And I find that massively exciting. And even stupid stuff like automating a spreadsheet in Google Sheets can actually help people out. Like I helped a friend who was works in a sort of food distribution, food kind of like selling thing, and she was trying to get some sort of collaborative sort of like people buying food as a group. So they all buy like a kilo of flour each and get a sack of flour. And it was taking her like a week to set up the spreadsheet, which everyone were coming in and try and putting in all their stuff. And I did a couple of little automation things, a couple of little scripts just to sort of automate her process. And it saved her a week, and she was just overjoyed by what I'd done. And so there's like all these like, I think that's the one thing I can sort of say is like, I mean, maybe it applies to gaming as well. It's just like getting like there's so many like practical problems around the world which technology can actually come in and really help with. And so my pitch is basically like, there's the stuff you can do like right now, and there's so much information, so many tools out there which you can use to start to build things, which might lead to you going to gaming. But there's actually really practical things you can do with technology as well. And I think that's really exciting because it's just so accessible nowadays, and it can be done from wherever you are. There's problems all around the world. Like there's one company we're working for called Agrinos, and they basically do. They're trying to make software of the process of selling livestock at regional sort of livestock exchanges quicker. And so I'm helping them out. So I'll be going down to next week and talking to the real estate agent who's a livestock agent about how to make his life easier. So there's all these like little problems around the world. Like the whole world is not all the technical work, all the game ideas. It's not done. There's so many more things out there. There's so much more things to be achieved, and there's so many new technologies coming through all the time. Like one story I love is in the last few months is I love how like this whole TikTok thing's happening. I don't know what it is. I'm an old guy, and I love how like I don't know if everyone heard about it, but like there's this whole thing where Donald Trump was doing a sort of an event in the States, and they booked out a whole big stadium because they thought millions of people were going to come, but actually it was the K-pop stands, the stalker fans, who were basically scamming them and buying tickets or reserving tickets. And it's just like this whole online kind of collaborative sort of use of technology, which is just, I can't understand it, but it's changing all the time. There's new stuff happening all the time. There's new crazy stuff happening with technology all the time. So there's new opportunities all the time. So like me, when I was a kid, I couldn't get in the film industry. It was the old school. So I just jumped on the new bandwagon and did the new thing and rode that through to today. So that's basically my story in a very, very fast version. Hit me with questions. Come on, I'm live. Small or large teams? Well, I've worked solo. I've worked in big teams. So like Xero, for example, I worked there. I was managing teams, and we had 600 developers across the globe. It was pretty exciting because like you had a massive like bunch of people you can bounce ideas off of, but also whenever you tried to do something, it was really slow because everything you do affects so many other teams as well. And it's probably the same in a big game production, I imagine. David's lost his video. I don't know what's going on. But in small teams, definitely, I think probably 3 or 4 to 5 in Common Code is what we do. We work with startups, and we try not to make teams bigger than 4 or 5 because that's about the really sweet spot for moving fast, but having enough people, enough brains to kind of work it out. Advice for rural students in these times: online. There's so much stuff. Like just try things out. You know, I was actually going to ask. I mean, have people tried out online code tools? You know, there's so many kind of pretty easy sort of things to get going. Like with my daughter who's 9, with her school, I did a code club. There's a whole bunch of resources on Code Club just to kind of get in there and try things out. David, I think you're muted. If you're trying to...
I was just talking about Code Academy. So Margarita's just put it up. Is free.
Yeah.
When you're looking at JavaScript, HTML5, CSS, so Cascade style sheets, it's more for web developers or for programming, but it's still a start, and they're providing free I suppose, interactions as well. There are a couple of others. Just trying to think. Yeah, I can put a list up. We can get a list up there as well. Yeah, but it gets you started. You can do it in your own free time. You can start upskilling yourselves during COVID and looking at any of these skill sets. So if you're looking at HTML5 or CSS, you're looking at JavaScript, Python. That does transfer over into games. It transfers over into visual effects studios. So Australia, we are doing a lot of stuff around visual effects. So Marvel and Pixar are being made or having parts of it edited and the pre-production in Australia. So there's also other opportunities. As Stephen said, he works in development. So we've got some of the biggest companies in Australia that are tech at Lyceum. Mike Cannon-Brooks and Steve Farber, multi-billionaires, and they started by writing code and as Steve said, looking at addressing real-world problems and helping people, advance, save time, be more productive, all of those skills are intertransferable across a number of different industries. So if you're looking at games, as Elise, Ben and Alexander said, they also do different things as well. Elise has done programming, Ben does a different sort of programming using the games engines. Steve, he's done a wonderful array of different things, as you said, studying in arts and film, and now it's led him to where he is today because of opportunities and just that determination of doing something. So yeah, there are free sources out there. I'm happy for people to reach out through info@legara.com.au to find out some of these other resources.
Contributing to open source is awesome as well, because that gives you an experience of like working with people as well, like, because that's probably the biggest thing. So when I was hiring as well, like people who are sort of coming from into tech sort of late or like new, they've done like bootstrap courses, like sort of general can't remember, don't know, it's gone. Anyway, basically the biggest surprise is the difference between like working on something yourself and actually working with a team is amazingly different. And so open source projects are great. I mean, there's one I used to work on recently. I had to give it up because I didn't have time, but I was working on Open Food Network, which is basically an open source thing for helping farmers sell produce to people in the cities. And that they are looking for volunteers all the time. So it's a chance to work on a real project.
It's probably also, even if you don't have the skill sets, being part of those communities as well and finding out the things that you do need to focus on. So if someone indicates, yes, we need more people using JavaScript or working in Python or some of the other, or we're wanting to do an interactive virtual reality or augmented reality application, use Unreal or Unity or some of the other games engines and software that's out there. So looking at joining some of these networks, and they run as Seta said, Hack Oktoberfest. There are a lot of other mentoring and workshop groups that people can join and be a part of. And as I said, happy to have follow-on conversations with people and provide a connection to industry where we can. But yeah, thank you, Steve, for your time, and I hope people have enjoyed today and have taken something away from it. Thank you from myself for being a part of it. It's something new that we're trying. Thank you both for Slava and Seta for allowing us to use Tallulah. We're looking at running more workshops, so please keep an eye out for those. And as I said, please let's connect and we'll go from there. So we'll leave it at there today. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you have a safe and wonderful week. And please keep doing what you're doing and keep learning and keep asking questions. No worries. Thank you very much.